Hello, writers. Have you ever bought a writing craft book someone says you just have to read?
Is it still sitting on your shelf? Have you even cracked the spine?
That's totally me.
Don't ask Renee how many craft books she owns.
Why do we keep buying these books we never read?
We all want to improve as writers, but that's hard to do alone.
That's why we started the Words to Write By podcast, to tackle these books together, chapter by chapter, and learn from their advice.
Or not. Sometimes they're wrong.
Hi, I'm Renee Nelson, former college writing instructor turned full-time writer and podcaster. After many years, I finally have a complete draft of my memoir.
And I'm Kim Smagato, author of the humorous fantasy novel Our Comeback Tour is Slaying Monsters, which is the first book in the Boy Bands and Dragons series, released by Riverfolk Publishing.
And now, on with the podcast. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Words to Write By. A workshop episode. Oh, these are great. Yes. Today, our guest is Summer Hanford, and she is the author of an epic fantasy series called Rise of the Summer God. Welcome, Summer.
Hi, you guys. Thank you for having me here.
Yeah. Do you want to tell us a little bit about your epic fantasy writing?
I would love to. The Rise of the Summer God series is my second epic fantasy series. It is not named after me in any way. It is named after the plot of the series. It just happened to be that way. My first series, Thriceborn, was published 2012. It's a 5-book series through an indie press. So it's 11 epic fantasy books over 2 series, and they're both completed. So I have gotten to the final battle several times.
Yeah. So we're reading a book that's based on Joseph Campbell's Hero with a Thousand Faces and his idea that all stories have these steps that go through it, or stages. And the stage we were talking about in our last podcast was approach to the innermost cave. So we're going to talk about all the stuff that builds up to the final battle, because epic fantasy is all about final battles, right?
Definitely. It has to be epic.
It also helps if it's long, too. That's how I always determine if something's an epic fantasy, if it's got swords and stuff on the cover and really thick bindings.
The logic works the same with poetry.
Epic poetries are also very long.
Very long, yeah.
That makes sense.
So, like you said, the major battles of an epic fantasy is what the whole book's about. How do you see your fantasy novels structured? Do you use the hero's journey?
I do not consciously use the hero's journey. I have done research into it. I did not read, but watch Joseph Campbell on tape when I was younger. We had a whole set of him talking about all kinds of things that we used to watch. I don't know why. Probably because we watched a lot of PBS. Gonna figure.
In my household, we used to record the Disney Family Sunday movies, and then my mom would plop them in. So, like, I have seen Mr. Boogedy how many times?
Well, that was our household rule. Kids could only watch TV if they were watching PBS.
Nice.
That was the rule.
Good rule.
A lot of British television.
One time I caught a bit of the Tripod series. Oh, that freaked me out bad. Anyway, so with a bit of a tangent, you have imbibed the concepts of the hero's journey. And in our podcast, we were talking about how you got the regular kind of adventures once you get started, but then at a certain point, things get serious and you start building things up to that final stake. And then, according to this, the big battle isn't necessarily the climactic battle. There's almost like more than one. So do your books have like more than one huge battle in them, or how does that work?
Definitely. Especially with the first series, there's an adventure that wraps up each book that brings us closer to finding out who the true villains are, who we really have to deal with if we're going to fix the world. We also have to ramp up to figuring out how we could fix the world, what the grand issues are. What I did think was interesting is I'd never thought about it until you invited me here. But in both of my series, the main characters literally have moments when they go into caves.
That's awesome.
So in the first series, it happens in the third book. The The hero has to go into, actually, I believe he has to go underwater and swim down a tunnel, and can barely make it before his lungs explode and come up in a cave and then fight a major battle
Wow.
because these evil people were lurking in this cave, creating more evil. So that is not the final battle of the series, but it is the epic battle of that book. So yeah, he literally has to go through a cave.
I mean, I wonder how much we've internalized this Joseph Campbell stuff, you know?
Or maybe just caves work really well for this sort of thing.
Yeah. What made you decide to use a cave?
Well, in that book, the villains were hidden somewhere in the castle, and it had Roman style baths in the bottom that were natural formation, which is why the castle was built there in the first place, the hot steam baths.
Mhm.
So it made logical sense
Hmm.
that there's another cavern hidden somewhere beyond the baths, the entrance through the baths, but cloaked by magic. And of course, it made comedic sense to make it in the women's baths because the hero was a man, a young man,
Ah,
had his first girlfriend and everything. So, it just made a lot of sense to make him have to go through both an embarrassing trial and then physical hardship and fear. That's why a cave in that one specifically, it just seemed to make. Plus, caves are scary, especially when you combine them with water.
mm.
Yes.
That's scary.
So I think you're touching on a couple of things for my next question, which was some examples in which you used the approach to the cave or this phase to build tension, to put things in place. Can you think of any other like things that you would throw in to your books to increase the tension or test the hero before the final battles?
Definitely, it also is supposed to be more of a metaphorical cave, right? Going down into your soul. I do know that part of the idea is that the character goes into the cave and is reborn better and stronger and more able to face the final challenge. On an emotional level, I actually don't prefer to do that because I like to set up actual emotional distress before the final battle. I feel like that raises the stakes because the character can have thoughts like, if I die, if I fail at this, the last thing I'll have said to so and so were these angry words.
Hmm.
So I actually like to amp up the interpersonal turmoil right before a big battle.
Hmm.
I feel like that raises the stakes, especially with relationships, right? The readers have been hoping this whole time that these two people would resolve their anger, their disagreements, whatever their disagreements are. And I put it there like, but maybe they never will.
That's one of those weird dichotomies with epic fantasies. You have these good versus evil, end of the world battles, but we're still reading about characters that have very personal issues. So, do you feel like the epic battle is kind of just a backdrop for these emotions, or do you throw in the emotions to make it so it's not just a giant battle?
For me, the emotions are to make the characters real. I think if the epic battle is the backdrop to the emotions, that's more tends to be a romantasy vibe,
Mm.
Hmm.
which romantasy is great. It's just not what I write. And when I read it, even though the authors are good and I enjoy it, I do find myself thinking, yeah, but wasn't there a battle for, just get past all these emotions. You have people to murder. So I think it's two sides.
Yeah, it kind of distracts the protagonist, right? They're trying to focus, but they're having a hard time focusing on killing the monsters because their best friend hates them now because they said this horrible thing.
Right.
That's helpful, but you've given the protagonist like a new desire, which is to reconcile at the end, which means getting through the monster, but that also is to save the realm or whatever. I mean, I'm just talking generally about.
Well, they have a personal goal and a world-saving goal, right? They need to achieve multiple goals.
Well, if you listen to our previous episode, we've been trying to apply these stages to a John Scalzi novel. And one of the problems that we've been having is that we're not emotionally engaged with the characters because the main character of that one, Jamie, there's nothing too bad happening. There's no personal stake if they don't rescue the kaiju. Like, he and his friends are good.
Right. There is no personal stake in anything. And I don't even know if there's an emotional growth. Like, I'm not sure. He doesn't seem too upset by much of anything. It's just kind of like, what is going on here? It's very wooden, you know?
Yeah, so obviously I don't want that. So that's one of the reasons to put in emotional. I've also found that I like to ask my characters questions to which I don't know the answer.
Mm,
For example, in the Rise of the Summer God series, the argument that two of the main characters that have had a love-hate relationship throughout the book and you're hoping they'll end up as friends. One of them is an ends justify the means type of character,
mhm.
and the other one is more like if I destroy who I am and let everybody I personally love die, what was the point in saving the world? So they have a big argument about that, and then they both go off to try and save the world in two different ways.
Hey,
And then I threaten, of course, that they might die so that they can never be reconciled. But I don't know the answer to that question. I don't know if the ends justify the means.
right. It leaves it open-ended.
That does come out open-ended. Spoiler, they do save the world, so I don't know which of them was right. I think that's up to the reader to decide.
Yeah. When you're writing your stories, do you conceive of the epic battle first? Like maybe not all the details, but like you know where the showdown's going to happen and you write up to that point? Or do you kind of write along and then it pops in your head like this is how it's all going to come down in the end?
I am one of those writers who knows the end of the story. I know that some people like to almost to go along for the ride with their characters. I don't do that. I'm much, much too much of a organizer. Maybe some people would say a control freak over my characters, but yeah, I know where the story's going. That is not to say that there can't be some changes along the way if something really doesn't fit. I have definitely written scenes that I loved that I had to take back out of a book because it just didn't make sense anymore. I thought it was going to go exactly here, but it kind of zigzagged around it to get to the end. But yes, I know what the end is, and I like that because I can do more foreshadowing and put in more hints because that's a good way to ratchet up tension.
Mhm.
Drop little hints along the way of who might be good, who might be evil. I definitely want the reader to get to the end and be like, oh, I should have seen that coming.
Mhm.
If there's a twist and who the bad guy is.
So after like giving an emotional stake to raise the tension, what's your favorite little technique to just amp up the tension before the end?
Um, I actually put a lot of thought into things like sentence length, paragraph length,
Hmm.
chapter length, and once we get toward the end and the final battles, all of those things get shorter.
Mm-hmm.
Description is more out. I mean, you want description, you're trying to evoke as much emotion as possible, but I work really hard at compact description. There's more action, more dialogue,
Mm-hmm.
less description, and everything just goes quicker, shorter sentences, shorter paragraphs, definitely shorter chapters. In The Rise of the Summer God, the final battle takes place in two different places,
Mm-hmm.
in two different fronts. And so you want to be able to switch back and forth pretty rapidly. You know, do that horrible thing where somebody gets a sword through their chest, and before you can find out if they live or die from this wound, you switch to a new chapter in the other part of the battle. You know, that thing that authors do to readers.
That was totally not what I thought your answer would be. Not that I had like a clear idea of what your answer would be, but it was clearly not sentences and paragraph length. But it makes so much sense on another level. That was a really great answer.
What did you think I would answer?
I don't know. Like, well, so when we're reading the book, this Christopher Vogler's The Writer's Journey, right?
Mhm.
It's based on Joseph Campbell. So he talks about all these ways that the hero prepares for the cave. You go to the damn tavern and you get your gear and you try to get clues. He's mentioned things where, you like kiss your sweetheart goodbye one more time just in case you don't come back. Whereas with yours, you start a fight. So,
I would make them start an argument.
Yeah.
Yeah.
right.
Or you reorganize the parties, or someone turns out to be, someone's alignment changes.
Or you wear the skin of your enemies, you put on their armor and you sneak your way in somehow.
I do those things.
He bases it a lot on like screenwriting. So a lot of this stuff is like outward stuff, right?
Right. And I do those things. one of the main characters who was going to have to engage in a battle. He had to get a magic shield and get a magic sword. The shield actually didn't end up being a shield. It's part of a whole nother sub quest. He has to take it and get it transformed into a chest guard.
Cool.
But yes, they did do that preparing and definitely a little bit of the fighting training montage going on.
You did a montage.
I don't know if it comes across as montagey when you're reading it, but
Hmm.
yeah, it's definitely a montage. I mean, if you put it on screen, it would definitely become a montage. It would be shots of him training with like several different people.
When you're writing dual, multiple point of views and you have two characters that are on their own kind of journey, was it hard to time it right so that they all arrived at those two battles at the same time? Did you have to go back and forth, or was it straightforward?
It is sometimes difficult because I like to have at least two things happen in each chapter, meaning two things that are either relevant to the overall plot or to the emotional arc of a character. Another friend of mine who's a writer said this too, so I don't know if we absorbed it from somewhere or if we just came to the same point, but two significant things. So the chapter's not just filler, it's not just a pleasant description, people camping for the night, something has to move the plot forward, either physically or emotionally or both.
Mhm.
So if my timing's not lining up and I have to add another chapter from one of the points of view, I have to slightly adjust the plot and twist it and turn it. But that usually ends up making for a better book, in my opinion. Usually, by the time I think of more plot points to add, it's like that should have been in there from the start. I don't know why I didn't have it in there before. If you're going to have a point of view character, they need to have enough things to do and they need to go through enough emotional changes of their own, right? So they probably needed that extra thing, whatever it was, to happen to them.
Mhm.
The last book, the Rise of the Summer God series, has, I think, 4 points of view
Wow.
by the final book, 4 or 5, I forget. I told myself the next series is going to have 2 points of view. That is it. I'm not doing that to myself again because it was a lot. I had, all the chapters arranged and you're dragging them around and making sure you didn't mess up the timing.
Yeah, that's only you need a giant diagram and a stuff on the wall to map everything out.
Yeah, maybe I can make this person get captured sooner, but how does that affect? Yeah, it was a bit of a pain, I have to say. My first series had one point of view character the whole time.
Hmm.
This is my first series, and I thought that was the best way to go. And it definitely made it easier to write.
So here's a question. You eventually had 4 or 5 points of view, but the original characters, the siblings that start off the story, they continue all the way to the end, right? Of the series?
To fully answer that question would spoil some things in the book. I don't know how fully you want me to answer.
Right.
And who survives and who doesn't.
But anyway, so you've got 6 books and they all have to have climactic battles and they all have to be bigger and bigger and bigger stakes. So how do you come up with raising the stakes for all these books as you go along?
Well, one thing I do that I consider almost cheating, but I also think a lot of fantasy authors do it. It's one of the reasons I start with young characters.
Mm.
Because they're learning about the world at the same time the reader is. It makes it easier to put in information
Uh,
without information dumping because the character is learning it for real in real time. So you're not just telling it to the reader, and it makes it so you can keep expanding their knowledge of the world, and therefore the plot can get bigger and the number of enemies can get bigger. So I use that.
because they're getting older, like the stuff, I hate to go back to Harry Potter, but the original Harry Potter, like he had to do hardly anything to finish
Right, exactly.
because they were really young. But, as they aged up, challenges got bigger
Exactly.
and they were able to handle it. A lot of fantasy.
Oh yeah, once you know that we fantasy authors do that, you can see it really easily. We do it all the time.
That is
That's why it's almost like cheating.
that is so clever. I wonder if they do that in sci-fi. No, no, in sci-fi, it's usually they're just really ignorant because they go to another world and they're just new,
Yeah,
you know?
that's how they do it in sci-fi. Yeah, it's a whole new world. So same thing. You're not info dumping. They're learning about the world in real time.
So do you do that and move them into different locations that they haven't been in before that have new?
Yeah, they start in their village and then they grow. So one's living in the castle and one's living in another village, the two siblings that start the Rise of Summer God. Then they start traveling to other dukedoms and other places. Yeah, the world grows physically and mentally. And emotionally, they meet more people.
They grow up, they go through puberty, they fall in love, fall out of love.
Yeah, one of them has most of his problems come from falling in love.
Ah,
The
nice.
How do you manage to make each book with its epic battles distinct from the other ones? Is it just the characters have changed, the battles have changed, or other things?
I guess I don't find that difficult. If there's the first book is mostly them growing emotionally, so their battles are more emotional, getting from being tweens to young adults.
Mhm.
The second book ends with a big battle that they think is going to set everything right, but that was just a little skirmish with only mortals. And then we realized that the gods are actually have a hand in this, so that battle didn't put things right and the stakes go up again.
Mhm.
Trying to remember how each book ends. One book, it might be the third one. Yes, the third one is all about trying to find certain people and protect them. Because now that we know the gods are involved, we know what a little bit more what they're after. So yeah, each one, as the characters learn, they face a new problem so that it's resolved in a different way. The only two that are the same, I'd say, is that there is a big physical battle in the final book, which I guess is somewhat similar to the end of book two, except that there's way more armies and more players and more magic involved. And it coincides with a whole nother battle going on in a different plane.
Mhm.
Yeah, I'd imagine as the plot thickens, so does the tension. Like there's so many pieces you're juggling, right? That it has to be bigger and better and scarier.
It does, yeah, it does. Like the only way you could make it not is if you murdered everyone, just kill everyone off, and then you'd be like, oh no, we're back to a smaller
You
scale.
know, like there's a big asteroid. There, there you go. Ta-da! At the end. That wouldn't be very fun though.
Usually I use a change in location and introducing more characters. In the first series, my first series, The Thriceborn, they go to a whole part of the kingdom they've never gone to before, and it's ruled by a sapient horse race
Hmm.
who has enslaved the humans who live around them to do their bidding. Obviously, it's going to be a whole new ending, epic fight to fix that. I mean,
Robert Jordan used that trick in Wheel of Time. He just kept making the world bigger and they went to new continents. And then the ships showed up and then people from other continents came in and
yeah, it just keeps getting bigger.
Increase the size of the map.
they increased the size of the map. Exactly.
I do usually keep the same map so far. I keep the same map. There's just parts of it that probably people don't bother to look at as much. The glossary gets bigger
Right.
with each book.
Do you have the whole map design from the very beginning, or do you kind of add and fiddle with it? Because, like, I wrote my story with something in my head of roughly what it was, but then I waited till the end and then had my husband make a map for me based on all the stuff that I had there.
Yeah, I definitely have a rough outline and then details get filled in. Yeah.
Mm.
I'm actually going to try it the opposite way for my next series. I'm going to get a map made by a professional artist who does maps,
Mhm.
and I will let the map inform the plot.
Hmm.
I'll see where my characters are in the world, and that'll help inform the details of the plot. I mean, I know the overall plot, but if she happens to put a river somewhere and they're on one side of it, they'll have to cross it. I'm going to see how that works.
It's also like if you design a map first, then you can really make places be logical. Like you really have the capital be a port city next to an actual port, or you won't have towns in the middle of nowhere, or it would reflect the way humans actually civilize a place, as opposed to the way fantasy authors, have someone travel across the way.
Yeah, like there's often kingdoms in the middle of nowhere with nothing, and you're like, well, then what are they eating? And
Yeah.
how do they have all these clothes? And
There's portals somehow. There's a magic portal that's bringing food in.
Yeah.
I always tell beginning authors to take a piece of the world that is kind of like what they're going to do and just flip it upside down or sideways, flip it in a direction so it's not our world and just use that as their map
That's a good idea.
so that it follows unless they're going to redefine the rules of physics, which is your world. You do what you want.
I actually looked for places in our world to set parts of the story and to have a map because I had no idea how far apart things were. like how long it would take to get someplace. Just so I could say, well, Google Maps, how long would it take to walk from here to here?
Yeah, that's a great idea.
It's fascinating. It never occurred to me that the map was informing the story. I always thought they were written or they were made after the fact. Like, oh, here's my story. And then, they make the map or something.
I think it all depends on the author, but the more world building you do before you start writing, for me, the easier it is to write the story because you know what'll happen. It's like you're playing D&D. You're in this city, you know what the city's like, you know what your character needs, so there's only a few things they might do to achieve their goals because you already invented the city and the government, and so you know what's going to happen.
It would also inform the nature of like approaching that, what the cave is, obviously, and then the approach, like how that character is going to prepare for it, right? If they're in a town without a tavern, there's no tavern to gather information or break some fingers trying to get in, like all that kind of stuff.
Or
But
you put the cave on the top of a mountain, they've got to climb up
they
that
got to climb a
mountain.
mountain.
Yeah. If you put the cave that leads into the volcano near the top of the mountain.
Wow. Okay. It's so fascinating.
Mhm.
But yeah, geography is important. I always tell beginning authors that geography is important. Think about it, your geography.
So if you're not using the hero's journey, what kind of steps do you take to structure your book? Like, is it a 3-act structure and then, there's a story arc, or do you just write it out and you're just naturally like a tension person? Like, you're like, well, you're always looking for drama. So it's easy to like conjure up the drama.
No, I am a big fan of the 3-act structure. I just expand it for the series. I always use Star Wars as an example, even though it's sci-fi, not fantasy. The three originally made Star Wars movies, right? We're learning about the world, there's some trouble. Movie 2, everything goes horribly wrong, everything sucks. And movie 3, finally the good guys, figure out what they need to do. They find the right tools and they blow up the Death Star.
Mhm. Again.
I think that's how it goes. I don't know, maybe that's a movie 2. I forget. I haven't watched them in a long time. But I'm a big fan of the 3-act things. You set normal, you have the inciting incident, so now your characters can never go back to normal. I always try and really stress that. Never. They can never go back. They can only go forward.
Mhm.
Even if their obsession is going back. Like, that famous time travel book where his whole obsession is going back to bring his wife back to life. But anyhow, you can never go back to normal.
Mm,
But even if your obsession is going back to normal, you can't go back there because whatever the incident was, you can never go back.
right.
So then you try to do something to fix things, and the characters have to think, we're on the right path, we're going to fix things. Whatever they do, it doesn't end up working, and now they're in more trouble than ever. And so you do that as many times as it takes to get to the end of the series, really. I like to structure each book that way and the whole series overall that way. But as I noted, I'm very structured in my writing.
Mhm.
I like to structure it.
Okay, another question. So on our podcast, kind of our shtick is that we read these writing advice books and then we critique them and then we talk about the advice. Do you have a favorite writing advice book and why?
I do not have a favorite writing advice book.
Okay.
I have read Stephen King's one, of course.
Did you like it? Was it helpful?
It was helpful in getting you to think about some particular things,
Okay.
like adverbs.
Yes, the famous adverb controversy. Yes.
I have found that all advice should be taken with a grain of salt. One book said you should never use had. You should never use the past tense and you should never use had. And in my older writing, you can see that reflected, like the strained writing to try and get things clear without using that 3-letter word.
Uh,
There was that. I had an instructor who said, don't ever use that. If you're using that, your sentence and structure, etc. So even now, sometimes when I send my books to edits, the editor will come back and be like, there should be a that there. Like that sentence is just weird without one, because I don't even notice I'm doing it because I tried so hard.
Shout out to my husband because he puts that in a lot of my writing. In my head, I read it in such a way that I don't need it.
yeah.
But that's because I know what the sentence is. But when someone else is reading it, they need that to.
They need the that.
I will admit that I have removed that. I do remove the that.
Oh, I'm sure we use too many that's. I'm sure people, especially starting out, use too many that's and too many hads and too many ly words. But yeah, all the advice books I've read, I've found you should definitely listen to them, but then you should also stop listening to them.
There is such a thing as too many craft books, except for the podcast, because that's what we do.
Right. So before we go, can you tell us where people can find your books?
You can find my fantasy books at any bookseller, at Barnes and Noble, Amazon, Kobo, Google Books, iBooks, wherever you want to go. They are available wide, as we say in publishing.
Thank you so much for setting up the time for just us to do this interview.
Yeah, this was really informative. I feel like I got a few like craft tricks out of this one.
You're going to read the next epic fantasy book a little different now that you know that they're going to start off as kids?
Yeah, definitely. I'm gonna look at the map a little closer too.
Well, thank you guys.
Thank
Thank you for inviting me on. I really enjoyed it.
Awesome, great. Well, it was nice seeing you again.
Yeah.
I know, it's good to see you too.
Words to Write By is produced by Renee Nelson and Kim Smiga-Otto. Our theme music is Roll Back the Carpet by Cool Cat Music. Have a great day.
Do you know, what's it called? I can't even remember the name of it anymore.
The hero's
There-
writer's journey.